First published in the summer of 1997, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone kicked off one of the best-selling series of all time. The Harry Potter books have sold millions upon millions of copies, and the Wizarding World has developed into one of the biggest multimedia franchises on the planet. But it all started with The Philosopher's Stone, a middle-grade children's novel with 17 chapters and 77,000 words. So, what makes Harry's first adventure so special? Why is this fantastical story such a masterpiece? The first chapter of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is unusual, not just within the context of the Harry Potter series, but within the context of children's literature generally. And the reason it is unusual is because we don't follow the main character. If you take a look at other children's stories, and most adult stories for that matter, the story focuses on the main character or characters immediately. The Harry Potter series doesn't do this. Whilst we follow the main character throughout the rest of the book, the opening chapter, at least to begin with, focuses on the Dursleys. After we're introduced to the Dursleys, we get our first hook at the beginning of the third paragraph. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Why is this a hook? Because it's intriguing. Great hooks intrigue the reader. They light up our curiosity and nudge us to keep reading, and we get a sprinkling of other lines that hook us in a similar way. Essentially, these opening lines tell us that something unusual is happening and that the Potter family is at the heart of it all. When Mr. Dursley drifts off to sleep, the narrative switches to McGonagall, Dumbledore, and later Hagrid. Here we get some rough answers to the questions that have sprung up in the opening pages. We learn that Harry's parents were killed by Voldemort and that Harry managed to survive the attack. We don't get the details, but we do know the baby in the blankets is unique. He survived the attack that killed his parents, and he's now being left with his aunt and uncle. Those splashes of intrigue from the first few pages have been addressed, but in a limited way. We still want to know more, not just about the plot, but about the magical world in general. That, above anything else, is the big hook in this chapter. We know that this other world exists, and we want to know more about it. Who exactly are the three mysterious people who arrived in Privet Drive and left Harry on the doorstep? We know their names, but not much else. In other words, we get a snippet of the magical world and Harry's place within it. First of all via Mr. Dursley, and then more directly with Dumbledore, McGonagall and Hagrid. But that's all it is, a snippet. We still want to know more about this world. Now, the novel could have started with what we know as the second chapter, The Vanishing Glass. There are plenty of great hooks here too, particularly in regard to what happens at the reptile house when the family visit the zoo. But The Boy Who Lived is a better first chapter because it gives us an interesting glimpse of the magical world, particularly during the closing scene outside Privet Drive. It's also a more logical place to start the story. The fall of Voldemort and the end of the First Wizarding War is a watershed moment in both Harry's life and the wider Wizarding world. So, though it may seem strange for Harry not to be the main character in the opening chapter, these opening pages excel when it comes to hooking the reader. Having hooked us into the story, the second chapter develops our central protagonist. Harry is another example of the orphaned hero, someone who has to negotiate through the world without the assistance of his parents. Other examples of this trope, if you want to use that word, would be characters like Oliver Twist, James Bond, or more recently, Kvothe from the Kingkiller Chronicle by Patrick Rothfuss. The advantage of an orphaned hero is twofold. Firstly, you automatically feel sorry for them, which makes you root for them and become invested in their story. And secondly, and this is something that isn't talked about as much, they're relatively free to create their own journey. The lack of attachment to a family makes it easier for the author to move their protagonist through the story in the way that they want to. Now, given that a lot of Harry Potter takes place in an isolated boarding school, this latter point is less relevant here, but it's worth bearing in mind when coming up with your own story. But to return to my original point regarding pity and feeling sorry for the protagonist, Our sense of sorrow is then built upon in the next chapter, The Vanishing Glass. We learn that Harry sleeps in a cupboard under the stairs, that he's bullied by Dudley, that his aunt and uncle treat him with disdain. This sense of pity continues into the third chapter as well, when Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon are determined to stop Harry from reading his Hogwarts letter. So alongside the plotline involving the mysterious letters, we're getting a series of reasons to root for the protagonist, building upon the foundation that was established in the first chapter when we learn about the death of Harry's parents. I'm going to address the brilliance of the plot in more detail, but I want to talk about world building first. In the fifth chapter of the book, Diagon Alley, we get a substantial look at Rowling's world building when Harry experiences the magical world for the first time with Hagrid at his side. What's great about Rowling's world building is the depth she gives her world, even when it comes to the small details. So, for instance, the wands in the Harry Potter universe are made from different types of woods, like elder or holly, and contain a core from an animal like a unicorn tail hair, a phoenix feather, or a dragon heartstring. There's also the currency of the wizarding world and the 3 coins of different values, along with different types of broomsticks and cauldrons. But my favourite example is the sweetie scene on the Hogwarts Express in chapter 6. In addition to telling us the names of the various goodies, Rowling also goes a step further with the chocolate frogs, as they each contain a famous witches and wizards card. Harry's first card is Albus Dumbledore, and there's a little description of all the great things Dumbledore has done throughout his life. And crucially, the card contains the name Nicholas Flamel, which becomes an integral part of the plot later on. But as great as this little scene is, the most impressive part of Rowling's world building will always be Hogwarts. Unlike a lot of other fantasy books, Harry Potter predominantly takes place in one location, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Yet this location never fails to be fascinating because of how deep and exciting the world building is. I personally find this single location much more interesting than the vast majority of fantastical realms and continents in other series. Feel free to disagree, but I'm not a fan of excessively long descriptive passages, and you get a lot of these in epic fantasy novels. The problem I find is that you're given so much information that it's impossible to remember it all. The scene being described becomes muddled in the reader's mind because there's just too much detail. What Rowling does really well is she keeps things short and snappy, particularly in the earlier books. A good example of this is when Harry first sees Hogwarts at the very end of chapter 6. Perched atop a high mountain on the other side, its windows sparkling in the starry sky, was a vast castle with many turrets and towers. That's all we get in terms of an exterior description of Hogwarts. Essentially, it's a big castle on a mountainside. Simple, easy to understand, easy to visualize. Rowling continues to use this simple technique throughout Harry's opening days at Hogwarts. The Gryffindor common room and the boys' dormitories are obvious examples. But there's much more to Hogwarts than just the aesthetic of the school. The various magical subjects and the teachers that are associated with them are fundamental. At the start of chapter 8, Rowling gives us a montage of the subjects Harry studies whilst at Hogwarts. It lasts for just over a page, so this quotation is just a small sample. But Rowling does a great job of building up the culture of the school, introducing us to the teachers and their subjects in a brief and most importantly accessible way. We're not oversaturated with information. Rowling continues to build upon this foundation throughout the novel, introducing us to a number of other fascinating locations, such as the 3rd floor corridor, the library, the trophy room, as well as the key landmarks in the Hogwarts grounds like Hagrid's hut, the Forbidden Forest and the Quidditch pitch. And the list continues as the series goes on. There's plenty of locations within Hogwarts that we don't see in the Philosopher's Stone, but the ones we do read about are always presented to us in an accessible yet distinctive way, which makes it easier for the reader to absorb. Rowling has said in several interviews that she's inspired by mystery authors, such as Marjorie Allingham, Dorothy L. Sayers, Neo Marsh and, of course, Agatha Christie. And the influence of this genre is prevalent throughout the Harry Potter series. The first book is no exception. The central mystery in this novel begins in chapter 5 when Hagrid takes a small package from a Gringotts vault. Naturally, we want to know what the item is, and our curiosity is heightened at the end of the 8th chapter when Harry reads an extract from the Daily Prophet. Investigations continue into the break-in at Gringotts on the 31st of July, widely believed to be the work of dark wizards or witches unknown. Gringotts goblins today insisted that nothing had been taken. The vault that was searched had in fact been emptied the same day. So not only do we want to know what's inside this package and where it's been moved to, we're also keen to know who's trying to steal it. Like all great mysteries, we're gradually given more pieces of the puzzle. At the end of chapter 9, after avoiding being killed by Fluffy, Harry deduces that the package Hagrid took from Gringotts is hidden beneath the trapdoor. Later on, Hagrid lets slip the name Nicholas Flamel, which prompts the trio to go looking for it. At the start of chapter 13, Harry then remembers that he first read the name on the back of a chocolate frog card, which is a great callback to the 6th chapter, when Harry and Ron are eating the sweeties on the train. At the end of chapter 15, when Harry and Hermione return from their misadventures in the Forbidden Forest, they realise that whoever is after the stone is working for Voldemort. But Harry's assumption that Snape is the culprit is, of course, incorrect. This is a classic example of a red herring, and it ties directly with what I was saying earlier in terms of Rowling being inspired by classic mystery authors like Agatha Christie. Red herrings are a key part of any great mystery. In the Philosopher's Stone, we're led to believe that Snape is the villain for several reasons. Firstly, Snape is bitten by Fluffy. Secondly, Snape appears to be jinxing Harry's broom during a Quidditch match. And thirdly, Snape questions Quirrell about the defences surrounding the stone. We learn in the final chapter that Quirrell was the real villain, and that he and Voldemort are essentially the same person, sort of. What's clever and above all fair about this twist is that the clues were there all along. Firstly, Quirrell was in Diagon Alley on the day that Gringotts was broken into. Secondly, Quirrell was the first one to know about the troll on Halloween. And thirdly, when Quirrell is knocked over by Hermione during the Quidditch match, Harry's broomstick returns to normal. This is a key component to all great mysteries. The clues that indicate the truth need to be there. Otherwise the reader feels cheated when the truth is revealed. Rowling understands this, and she always nails this part of her stories in both the Harry Potter novels and the Cormoran Strike novels. The combination of these elements is why the Philosopher's Stone is a masterpiece. Rowling hooks us with the first chapter, teasing us with the world she has created before introducing us to a protagonist who is impossible not to root for. And when he enters the magical world for the first time with Hagrid, he experiences a detailed yet accessible world that's easy for the reader to latch onto. This terrific world building goes up another level when Harry arrives at Hogwarts. And again, it's Rowling's ability to balance depth with accessibility that makes life at Hogwarts such a thrill to read. Then, within this fascinating location, we experience a fantastical plot that grips us until the very end and utilises techniques from classic mystery books. Whilst the Philosopher's Stone is the shortest book in the series, it's packed with great content. It's no wonder that both children and adults fell in love with this book and were desperate to read the next adventure. 25 years after it was first published, the Philosopher's Stone is still a masterpiece. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say. Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Please feel free to add to what I've said and offer more reasons why you think this is a masterpiece, or indeed, if you disagree with me, tell me why. Again, thank you so much for listening to what I have to say, and I'll be back soon with another video.